Hi, I'm Claire Whitman. I'm 32 years old, and last week I thought my life was perfect. I was engaged to a man I loved, and we were at a dinner with his closest friends, the people who were supposed to become my family. That's when my fiancé, Ethan, raised his glass with a smirk and said to the table, "This is Claire. She works in a little office typing reports all day. Not glamorous, but someone has to do it." The table erupted in laughter. I felt my smile freeze on my face while my heart cracked right down the middle. That one moment ended everything I thought I knew about love, and it was the beginning of me finally finding myself. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. I've always been the quiet one. Growing up, our house was loud with anxieties, not laughter. My parents were good people, but they were stretched thin by bills and disappointments. Love wasn't shown with hugs or praise. It was shown by not adding to the burden. So, from a young age, I learned to be self-sufficient. I learned to fix my own bicycle chain, to do my homework without asking for help, and to swallow my problems so they wouldn't become someone else's. My defining characteristic was reliability. I was the daughter who never got into trouble, the student who always turned her assignments in on time, the friend who you could call at 3 a.m. to talk you through a crisis. I built my entire identity around being dependable, on being the solid ground while everyone else was the earthquake. It was this desire for stability that led me to my job. After college, while others chased high-risk, high-reward careers in big cities, I took a position as an administrative manager at a mid-sized consulting firm, Sterling Cole. It wasn't a job that you'd brag about at a cocktail party. There were no flashy titles or seven-figure bonuses. My work was invisible, done in the background. I was the person who made sure the company ran smoothly. I handled payroll, streamlined invoicing, managed vendor contracts, and kept the office infrastructure from collapsing. When the Wi-Fi went down, they called me. When a client's payment was late, I was the one who chased it. I was the ghost in the machine, and for a long time that was enough for me. I found a deep, quiet satisfaction in creating order from chaos. My desk was a fortress of efficiency. My spreadsheets were masterpieces of logic and precision. But over the past year, something in me had started to shift. I saw the inefficiencies that no one else did, the wasted hours, the redundant processes, the thousands of dollars hemorrhaging from the company's accounts due to outdated systems. My boss, Mr. Harrison, was a decent man, but he was old school. He trusted what he knew, and he didn't like change. So, I didn't propose a change. I started building one. Secretly, on my own time, I began developing a new internal management system. I spent my evenings and weekends teaching myself to code, watching tutorials, and sketching out wireframes in a worn notebook. I called it Nexus. It was a centralized platform designed to automate everything from project billing to employee timesheets. It was ambitious, and it was mine. The thrill of watching it come together, line by line, was more exciting than anything I had ever done. It was the one part of my life that was just for me. A secret project that proved I was more than just a functionary typing away in a small office. I knew with absolute certainty that Nexus could save the company hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. I was just waiting for the right moment to present it. I met Ethan during this period of quiet creation. He was everything I wasn't. Loud, charming, and effortlessly confident. He walked into a room and owned it. He was a financial advisor at a prestigious firm run by his father, and he moved in a world that was completely foreign to me. His friends were surgeons, tech entrepreneurs, and lawyers who summered in the Hamptons. Their lives were a whirlwind of charity galas, weekend yacht trips, and investments that were worth more than my parents' house. He pursued me relentlessly. At first I was intimidated, even skeptical. What could a man like him possibly see in a woman like me? But he seemed captivated by my quiet nature. He told me he loved my calmness, that I was a peaceful harbor in his chaotic life. He said he was tired of the shallow women in his circle, women who were more interested in his trust fund than his heart. He made me feel seen. He'd listen, or at least he seemed to, when I talked about my day. He'd praise my cooking and tell me how much he admired my work ethic. For the first time, I felt like my steadiness wasn't just a utility, but something to be cherished. I fell in love with the way he made me feel, not just loved, but accepted. I thought he saw the person I was beneath the quiet exterior. I thought he appreciated my strength, my loyalty, my ability to hold things together. When he proposed 6 months ago on a trip to Italy, with a ring that cost more than my car, I thought my life was a fairy tale. I had found a man who loved me for who I was, not who he wanted me to be. I was so wrong. The signs were there, of course. They always are, aren't they? Little red flags that look like rose petals in the moment. There was the time he upgraded my perfectly functional laptop to a sleek, expensive model I didn't need, saying my old one was embarrassing. Or the way he'd gently mock my practical sedan, calling it my sensible little box. He'd redecorate parts of our shared apartment without asking, replacing my comfortable, worn armchair with a cold, minimalist piece of furniture that looked like a sculpture. When I introduced him to my parents, he was perfectly polite, but I could feel his judgment radiating off him. He called their cozy suburban home quaint. He smiled condescendingly when my father proudly showed him the deck he had built himself. Later, in the car, he'd said, "They're sweet people, Claire. Very simple." It was meant as a compliment, but it felt like a dismissal. I brushed it all aside. I told myself that this was what compromise felt like. We came from different worlds, and it was natural that there would be friction. I convinced myself that his comments weren't malicious, that he was just trying to share his world with me, to elevate me. I didn't realize he wasn't trying to lift me up. He was trying to erase the parts of me that didn't fit into his perfectly curated life. He didn't want a partner. He wanted an accessory. And that night at the restaurant, he made it clear that I was the wrong brand. The restaurant was called Aurelia. It was the kind of place where the waiters wore starched white jackets and the water glasses were never less than half full. The air hummed with the quiet confidence of old money. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, and the lighting was so dim and artful that it made everyone look like they were in a movie. It was Ethan's favorite spot, a place he brought clients to close big deals, a place that always made me feel like I needed to sit up straighter. I had spent an hour getting ready, agonizing over my outfit. I settled on a simple, elegant black dress, understated and classic. I thought I looked nice. But when Ethan saw me, his eyes did a quick, critical scan, and he said, "That's nice, honey. Very safe." He then adjusted the collar of his own custom-tailored shirt, a silent gesture that spoke volumes. His friends were already there when we arrived, seated at a large round table in a prime corner of the dining room. There was Mark, a corporate lawyer with a booming laugh and an ego to match, his wife, Amelia, who ran an art gallery and appraised everyone with a cool, detached gaze, and David, a tech startup founder who spoke in a dizzying dialect of venture capital and user acquisition. They were Ethan's inner circle, his court. They greeted him with loud backpats and inside jokes, and I was given a round of polite but distant smiles. I slid into my chair, feeling my world shrink to the size of my place setting. The conversation took off like a rocket, and I was immediately left behind. They talked about stock options, about their upcoming ski trip to Aspen, about the new partner at Mark's firm. I had nothing to contribute. My life, my work, my reality, it had no place at this table. I tried to follow along, nodding and smiling when it seemed appropriate, but I felt like I was watching a foreign film without subtitles. Ethan made no effort to include me. He held court, telling a story about a rival firm, his voice full of bravado. He was performing, and his friends were his adoring audience. I watched him, this man I was going to marry, and a cold feeling started to creep into my chest. He wasn't the same person when he was with them. The gentle, attentive man I knew was gone, replaced by this arrogant, swaggering stranger. About halfway through the main course, David, the tech founder, turned to me. It felt like a spotlight had suddenly swung in my direction. "So, Claire," he said, his tone casual, "Ethan never really tells us what you do. Are you in finance too?" The whole table went quiet. Everyone looked at me, waiting. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was my chance, I thought. My chance to tell them about my work, about the systems I managed, maybe even hint at the Nexus project I was so proud of. I opened my mouth to speak, but Ethan cut me off before a single word could escape. He let out a short, dismissive chuckle, the sound of a parent about to explain away a child's imaginary friend. He leaned back in his chair, gesturing towards me with his wine glass. "Claire?" he said, drawing out my name as if it were a curiosity. "Oh, she's not in our world." He took a slow sip of his wine, letting the suspense build. His friends watched him, their faces alight with amusement. "She works in a little office typing reports all day," he announced, his voice laced with a theatrical pity. "Not glamorous, but someone has to do it." The words hung in the air for a second, and then Mark exploded with laughter, a loud braying sound that echoed in the quiet restaurant. David snickered, and even Amelia cracked a thin, cruel smile. The table erupted, my face burned. The heat rushed from my chest to my cheeks, and I was sure I was the color of the red wine in my glass. I felt the eyes of everyone at the table on me, but they weren't seeing me. They were seeing the caricature Ethan had just painted, a dowdy, insignificant secretary, a punchline. My own smile felt like a cheap mask I was holding up with trembling hands. I wanted to stand up and scream. I wanted to throw my drink in his face. I wanted to dissolve into the floor, but I did what I had always done. I swallowed it. I became smaller. I became quieter. I absorbed the blow so as not to make a scene. Well, Mark boomed, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. Someone's got to keep the world running, right? Maybe she can file our receipts for us when we're all retired billionaires. More laughter. Ethan raised his glass to Mark, a gesture of solidarity. To the little people, he said, grinning. He didn't look at me once. In his world, in that moment, I wasn't a person. I was a prop he had used to get a laugh, to reinforce his own superiority. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. The conversation moved on, leaving me in the wreckage. I picked at my seared scallops, the taste turning to ash in my mouth. I couldn't hear the words anymore, only the echo of their laughter. Each time Ethan smiled, each time one of his friends told a joke, it felt like another small act of cruelty. He had offered me up to them as a sacrifice, and they had feasted. I sat there frozen in my chair, realizing that I was engaged to a man who didn't respect me. And maybe, just maybe, he never had. The car ride home was cloaked in a thick, suffocating silence. The city lights smeared past the windows, but I saw nothing. All I could see was the look on Ethan's face as his friends laughed at me. He was humming along to a song on the radio, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, completely oblivious, or worse, completely indifferent, to the chasm that had just opened between us. I waited until we were inside our apartment, the door clicking shut behind us before I spoke. My voice was small, fragile. Why did you do that, Ethan? He tossed his keys into a ceramic bowl on the console table, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense quiet. Do what? He asked, already shrugging off his jacket. At dinner. The way you talked about my job. About me. He turned to me then, and his face was a mask of practiced innocence. Oh, that? Claire, don't be so sensitive. They were just joking. It didn't feel like a joke, I whispered, wrapping my arms around myself. It felt like you were mocking me, he sighed. A long, exaggerated sound of exasperation. He walked over and put his hands on my shoulders, his touch feeling heavy and dismissive. Babe, that's just how they are. It's just banter. You need to learn how to take a joke. My friends really like you. They just like to tease. The gaslighting was so smooth, so effortless, it almost worked. For a split second, I questioned myself. Was I being too sensitive? Was I overreacting? But then the memory of their faces, of Ethan's triumphant smirk, flashed in my mind. No, this wasn't a joke. This was a pattern. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the dam inside me finally broke. The dinner wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the loudest and clearest example of 1,000 tiny cuts I had endured for years. My mind became a movie theater, playing a highlight reel of every moment he had made me feel small. I remembered the time we were getting ready for his company's holiday party. I had bought a new dress, a beautiful emerald green one that made me feel confident. When I came out of the bedroom, he had looked me up and down, a small frown on his face. Are you sure about that? He'd asked. It's a little plain. Here. He had gone to his closet and pulled out a slinky, low-cut designer dress he had bought me, one that always made me feel exposed and uncomfortable. Wear this one. It's more appropriate. I had changed, feeling like a doll being dressed for his amusement. I spent the entire night tugging at the hemline, feeling his disapproval like a physical weight. I remembered the time I came home, bursting with pride because I had successfully negotiated a new contract with our office supply vendor, saving the company $10,000 a year. I told him about it, my voice full of excitement. He had glanced up from his phone and said, "That's nice, honey," before immediately launching into a story about a multi-million-dollar deal Mark had just closed. My achievement was reduced to a child's drawing to be patted on the head and then forgotten, and I remembered the conversation we had about our future. I had tentatively mentioned that I was thinking of getting a certification in project management, that maybe one day I could even use my skills to start a small consulting business, helping nonprofits streamline their operations. It was a fragile, secret dream I had never spoken aloud. He had laughed. Not a mean laugh, but a soft, patronizing one. "That's a cute idea, Claire," he'd said. "A little hobby to keep you busy. But let's be realistic. You're not a business person. Just stick to what you're good at." Each memory was a fresh stab of pain. For years I had made excuses for him. He's just trying to help. He just wants the best for me. He just doesn't understand my world. But lying there in the dark, I saw it for what it was. It wasn't love. It was control. He didn't want me to grow. He wanted me to stay in the neat little box he had built for me. The sweet, simple, sensible girl who would never outshine him. The girl who managed his home, paid his bills, and soothed his ego, all while asking for nothing in return. The love I thought we had was a compromise, but I was the only one compromising. I had compromised my style, my ambitions, my voice, my very sense of self, all to fit into his life. And what had he compromised? Nothing. He hadn't met me halfway. He had simply absorbed me. Ethan rolled over in his sleep, his arm draping heavily across my waist. The touch that once felt comforting now felt like a chain. He was snoring softly, completely at peace while my world was falling apart. I lay perfectly still, my body rigid, every muscle tense. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down my temple into my hair. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of rage. The quiet, dependable girl he thought he knew was finally, terrifyingly, waking up. The first hint of dawn was a faint gray line on the horizon. The city was still asleep, silent except for the distant hum of the highway. I had not slept. I had spent the entire night cataloging my own erasure, and with the morning light came a cold, sharp clarity. It wasn't a question of if I could stay. It was a fact that I could not. I would not spend another day of my life being the punchline to someone else's joke, especially not the man who was supposed to love me most. I looked at Ethan, still sleeping soundly beside me. His face, which I had once thought was so handsome, now looked like that of a stranger. The curve of his mouth, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, it all seemed foreign. The love I felt for him had been a powerful, all-consuming force. But in the space of a single night, it had curdled into something else. A hollow ache of betrayal. The man I loved didn't exist. He was a character I had invented to explain away the cruelty of the man who lay beside me. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I slipped out of bed, my movements slow and deliberate, careful not to make a sound. The floor was cold beneath my bare feet. I tiptoed into the walk-in closet, the scent of his expensive cologne hanging in the air, and pulled out a suitcase I hadn't used in years. The act of packing was a strange, silent ritual. I wasn't just choosing clothes. I was choosing which parts of my life to take with me. I bypassed the designer dresses he had bought me, the ones that never felt like me. Instead, I packed my favorite worn-in jeans, the soft sweaters I loved, the simple, practical clothes he'd called safe. I packed the books from my nightstand, the ones he'd never bothered to read. I took the small framed photo of me and my sister Hannah laughing on a beach, but I left the large, silver-framed engagement photo of me and Ethan on the dresser. I packed my laptop, the one containing the secret to my future, the Nexus project. Every item I placed in the suitcase felt like an act of reclamation. This is me. This is mine. I moved through the apartment like a ghost. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft zip of my suitcase and Ethan's steady, oblivious breathing from the bedroom. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of terror and exhilaration. I was dismantling the life I had so carefully built, but I was also setting myself free. When the suitcase was full, I went to the kitchen. I found a notepad and a pen by the phone. What do you write to a man who has shattered your world? An angry tirade? A list of his transgressions? A declaration of independence? In the end, I settled on something simple, something that felt true to the woman I had been, even if she was no longer the woman I intended to be. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote, "I need time to think." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. It was non-confrontational. It was quiet. And most importantly, it would buy me time. It framed my departure as a temporary retreat, not a final escape, which would hopefully delay the inevitable storm of his anger and give me a head start. I left the note propped up against the ridiculously expensive coffee machine he'd insisted on buying. I took one last look around the apartment. It was beautiful, a perfect page from a design magazine. But it wasn't a home. It was a stage set for his life, and I was just a supporting character. My presence here was conditional, based on my ability to play a part I could no longer stomach. Closing the door softly behind me felt like the final click of a lock turning, setting me free. The cool morning air hit my face, and I took a deep, shuddering breath. I walked to my sensible little sedan, the car he hated, and got in. When I turned the key, the engine humming to life sounded like a promise. I didn't know where I was going at first, just away. Then my instincts took over. I needed a safe harbor. I needed my sister. I drove through the empty streets, the rising sun painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. It felt like the world was being reborn, and maybe I was too. When I pulled up to Hannah's apartment building, my hands were shaking. I had acted on pure, cold resolve. But now, the enormity of what I had done washed over me. I had just walked away from my entire life. Hannah opened the door in her pajamas, her face a mixture of confusion and concern that quickly melted into understanding when she saw my face and the suitcase in my hand. She didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a fierce hug, and in the safety of her arms for the first time all night, I finally let myself cry. The tears weren't just for the man I had lost, but for the years I had lost trying to be someone I wasn't. It was the sound of a heart breaking, yes, but it was also the sound of chains falling away. The first few days at my sister Hannah's apartment were a blur of sleep and tears. I'd drift off on her comfortable sofa, exhausted from the emotional toll of the night I left, only to wake up with a jolt, my heart pounding as the reality of my situation crashed down on me all over again. Hannah was my anchor. She didn't push or prod. She simply existed beside me, a warm, steady presence that made the ground feel solid beneath my feet. She'd make me tea, sit with me while I stared blankly at the television, and listen without judgment whenever I found the words to speak. "I feel so stupid," I mumbled one afternoon, curled up in an Afghan her grandmother had made years ago. "How did I not see it, Hannah? How did I let him make me feel so small for so long?" Hannah tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear. "You didn't let him do anything, Claire. He did it to you. That's not your fault. You saw the good in him because you're a good person. You wanted to believe in the best version of him, and you loved him. There's no shame in that." Her words were a balm. For years, Ethan's voice had been the primary narrator in my head, a constant critic pointing out my flaws. Now, replaced by Hannah's unwavering support, I started to feel a tiny flicker of my old self return. We spent the evenings looking through old photo albums, laughing at our awkward teenage years. Seeing that younger version of myself, the determined girl who won the state science fair, the girl who taught herself guitar, reminded me that I existed long before Ethan came along. I had been whole once, and I could be whole again. Meanwhile, my phone had become a source of constant anxiety. Ethan's texts started coming in waves, each one a different strategy in his playbook of manipulation. The first day, it was feigned concern. "Ethan, hey, where are you? I woke up and you were gone. Is everything okay?" "Ethan, Claire, call me. I'm starting to worry." I read the messages, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, the familiar urge to soothe his anxiety rising in me. Hannah saw the look on my face, took the phone from my hands, and put it on silent. "You don't owe him a response," she said firmly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." By day 3, his tone had shifted to annoyance. "Ethan, okay, this isn't funny anymore. I get it, you're mad about dinner. You've made your point. Are you coming home soon?" "Ethan, seriously, Claire, this is childish. We're adults. We're supposed to talk things out." The hypocrisy was staggering. He wanted to talk things out now, after he had publicly humiliated me and then dismissed my feelings as oversensitive. The anger that had been simmering inside me began to harden into resolve. I deleted the messages without a second thought. By the end of the week, he'd circled back to condescending charm, the tactic that had always worked before. "Ethan, I miss you. The apartment is empty without you. I'm sorry if I was a jerk the other night. Let me make it up to you. I'll book a table at Aurelia, just the two of us." The suggestion was so tone-deaf it was almost laughable. He wanted to take me back to the scene of my humiliation as a peace offering. He didn't get it. He didn't see me at all. He just saw a piece of his life that was missing and wanted it back in its proper place. That was the message that finally severed the last, frayed thread of hope I had been clinging to. It was on that same day, as I sat staring at Ethan's clueless text, that an email notification popped up on my laptop. The subject line read, "Following up." It was from Sarah Chen, a former senior consultant at Sterling Cole who had left about a year ago to join a rival firm, Innovate Dynamics. She was brilliant and sharp, one of the few people who had ever seemed to notice the work I did behind the scenes. She had tried to recruit me once before, but I'd politely declined, loyal to my company and, if I was being honest, too comfortable in my quiet role. My first instinct was to ignore it. My life was in pieces. How could I possibly think about my career? The voice in my head, Ethan's voice, whispered that I wasn't qualified, that I would be in over my head. But then Hannah's voice cut through the noise. "You were whole before him." With a deep breath, I opened the email. Sarah was direct. She said she'd heard through the grapevine about some of the process improvements I had made at Sterling Cole, and that she was building a new operations team at Innovate. She ended the email with a simple question. "Are you happy where you are, Claire? Or are you ready for a real challenge? Let's have coffee." My hands trembled. This wasn't just an email. It was a lifeline. It was a glimpse of a different future, one that I could build for myself. The fear was immense, a cold wave of anxiety that threatened to drown me. I was just a typist, a girl who pushed Excel around. Who was I to think I could handle a real challenge? I almost closed the laptop. But then I thought of Ethan's smirk. I thought of his friends' laughter. I thought of all the years I had made myself smaller to fit into his world. And a new feeling, hot and powerful, surged through me. Defiance. I spent the next hour typing and deleting, agonizing over every word. Finally, I sent a simple reply. Hi, Sarah, it's great to hear from you. I'd love to get coffee. How is Tuesday? The moment I hit send, a profound sense of calm washed over me. It was the first decision I had made in years that was completely, entirely for me. The interview, because coffee quickly turned into a formal interview, was 2 days later. I wore a simple navy blue suit, one of my safe outfits, but for the first time, it didn't feel safe. It felt powerful. The offices of Innovate Dynamics were a world away from Sterling Cole's drab, beige cubicles. It was all glass and steel and open-concept spaces, buzzing with an energy that was both intimidating and infectious. Sarah Chen was even more impressive than I remembered. She was direct, intelligent, and didn't waste time with small talk. She asked me about my work, and instead of giving my usual self-deprecating answers, I found myself talking about it with a passion I didn't know I had. I told her about the systems I'd built, the contracts I'd negotiated, the money I'd saved the company. Then, taking a leap of faith, I told her about Nexus. I opened my laptop and walked her through the prototype. I explained the architecture, the user interface, the automated billing system. I showed her the data projections, the sheer scale of the efficiency it could create. As I spoke, the nervous, timid woman who had sat silently at Aurelia disappeared. I was an expert. I was in command of my subject. I was articulate and confident. Sarah listened intently, her eyes sharp and focused. She asked probing, intelligent questions that showed she understood the project on a deep level. When I was finished, she leaned back in her chair and was silent for a long moment. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. Claire, she said finally, her voice even. This is brilliant. This isn't just an internal tool. This is a marketable product. She paused, looking me directly in the eye. We're not looking for an administrative manager. We're looking for a director of operations. Someone to build and lead the entire department that will implement systems like this, both for us and for our clients. Director of Operations. The title seemed to hang in the air, impossibly large. It was a title for people like Mark and David. It wasn't for me. I don't know if I'm qualified for that, I stammered, the old insecurities rushing back in. Sarah smiled, a small, knowing smile. You just spent 30 minutes proving that you are. You built an enterprise-level system from scratch in your spare time. You understand the granular details and the big picture. The only person in this room who doesn't think you're qualified is you. Her words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. She was right. For years, I had let Ethan define my worth. I had internalized his dismissiveness until it became my own self-doubt. I walked out of that office an hour later with a verbal offer for a position I never would have dreamed of applying for. The salary was almost double what I was making. I would have my own team. I would be in charge of bringing Nexus to life. As I drove back to Hannah's, the city lights seemed brighter, the world more vibrant. I hadn't set out to get revenge. I had only set out to survive. But as I considered the offer, I realized that the greatest revenge wasn't in tearing Ethan down. It was in building myself up, far beyond the limits of the small box he had tried to keep me in. The 2 weeks that followed were a whirlwind of quiet, decisive action. While I was navigating the logistics of my new job offer, negotiating final terms with Sarah, and discreetly giving my 2 weeks' notice at Sterling Cole, Ethan's life began to quietly implode. He had no idea. He simply knew that the ghost in his machine, the one who had kept his entire life running smoothly, had vanished. The first panicked call came on a Tuesday morning while I was at a coffee shop with Hannah, celebrating my official acceptance of the director position. My phone buzzed on the table and Ethan's name flashed across the screen. My stomach instantly clenched, a conditioned response from years of managing his moods. Don't answer it, Hannah said, her voice firm. I have to, I replied, my voice betraying my nerves. We have shared accounts? A lease? I can't just disappear. I took a deep breath and swiped to answer, putting the call on speaker. Claire. His voice was sharp with irritation, not concern. The landlord just called me. The rent is late. He's talking about late fees. Did you forget to pay it? The assumption that I had forgotten, that I had failed in my duties, was so typical. I felt a surge of cold anger. No, Ethan, I didn't forget, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. The rent is due on the 1st of the month. I am no longer living there, so I did not pay it. It's your responsibility now. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears in his brain grinding, trying to process this new reality. What do you mean your responsibility? We're a team. You've always handled the bills. Where is the money? Just transfer it over and I'll take care of it. The money for the rent is in the joint account where it always is, I stated flatly. You have the login details. You'll have to make the payment yourself. But I don't know how to do that online portal thing, he sputtered, his voice rising in frustration. This is ridiculous. Just fix it. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said, and before he could argue, I ended the call. My hand was shaking, but a smile touched my lips. Hannah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That, she said, was amazing. A few days later, the second call came. This time he was less angry and more panicked. Claire, my credit card was declined at the gas station. It was embarrassing, and I just got a text alert from the bank about the car payment. It's past due. What the hell is going on? Did you cancel my card? I didn't cancel your card, Ethan, I explained, my voice patient, as if I were talking to a difficult client. But the automatic payment for your card was linked to my personal savings account, which I use to manage our finances. I've disconnected it. The same goes for your car payment. You'll need to set up the payments yourself from your own account. My own account? He asked, bewildered. But you always just made sure there was enough money in there. I don't keep track of this stuff. That's what you do. That's what you do. The words hung in the air. He didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as his personal financial manager. His employee. Yes, Ethan, I said, my voice hardening. That's what I did. I don't work for you anymore. I hung up again. The click of the phone feeling like a punctuation mark on a chapter of my life I was finally closing. The final call, the one that truly signaled the shift of power, came late the following week. I was in the middle of packing up my few belongings from the apartment while Ethan was at work, an arrangement Hannah had insisted upon. I had my own boxes and my own moving van. I was systematically extracting myself from his life. He called, and his voice was a wreck, a frantic, desperate mess. Claire, I'm looking at all these statements, he wailed, his voice cracking. The utilities, the internet, the insurance. There are late notices everywhere. I tried to pay the rent, but I think I sent it to the wrong place. The landlord is threatening to evict me. I don't understand any of this. You have to help me. I paused, a box of my books in my hands. The old Claire would have rushed in to save him. She would have taken the mess he had made and neatly organized it, soothing his anxiety and restoring order, all while accepting the blame for his incompetence. But the old Claire was gone. You're a financial advisor, Ethan, I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. I'm sure you can figure out how to read a utility bill. This isn't fair. You can't just abandon me like this. I need you. No, I said, the truth of the word settling deep in my bones. You don't need me. You need an assistant. I'm resigning. I hung up and blocked his number. The next day, I walked into the offices of Innovate Dynamics not as a guest, but as a director. The feeling was indescribable. Sarah introduced me to my new team, a small group of bright, eager analysts and developers. When she introduced me as the architect of the Nexus system, their eyes lit up with genuine respect. In my first meeting, I laid out my vision for the project. People listened. They took notes. They asked insightful questions. No one cut me off. No one smirked. My ideas were treated as valuable, and my leadership was accepted without question. My new office had a floor-to-ceiling window with a view of the entire city. It was a stark contrast to my old windowless cubicle at Sterling Coal. As I stood there, looking out at the sprawling metropolis, I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years. I had spent so long in the shadows, managing the minutiae of someone else's life, that I had forgotten what it felt like to stand in the sun. The work was challenging and demanding. I spent long hours refining the Nexus prototype, developing a strategic plan for its implementation, and getting to know the intricacies of my new role. But it was the most fulfilling work I had ever done. For the first time, I wasn't just supporting someone else's success. I was building my own. I was no longer an invisible force in the background. I was the one in charge, the one driving the change. And every small victory, every successful line of code, every productive meeting, was a brick in the foundation of my new life, a life that belonged completely and utterly to me. 3 weeks after I started my new job, I was finally beginning to feel a sense of rhythm and normalcy. The initial chaos of leaving Ethan had subsided, replaced by the demanding but rewarding routine of my work at Innovate Dynamics. We had just successfully completed the first internal trial of the Nexus system, and the results were even better than I had projected. The mood in the office was electric. Sarah had taken my entire team out for a celebratory lunch, and as I sat there, surrounded by my brilliant, respectful colleagues, I felt a sense of belonging that I had never experienced in Ethan's world. I had found my place. I was thriving. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been my companion for years had vanished, replaced by a quiet confidence that grew stronger every day. I was so absorbed in my new life that I had almost forgotten about the old one. That's why I was so completely caught off guard when I returned from lunch to find a message from Maria, the receptionist at the front desk. "Hi, Claire," she said through the internal chat. "There's a gentleman here to see you. An Ethan Vance. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says he's your fiancé and that it's urgent." My blood ran cold. Fiancé. He was still using that word. My hands started to tremble, and for a terrifying second, I was back in that restaurant, small and silent and humiliated. I took a deep, steadying breath. I was not that person anymore. I was a director in this company. This was my territory. He did not get to walk in here and rattle me. I had anticipated this possibility. I had hoped he would just accept my silence and move on, but I knew Ethan's ego wouldn't allow that. He would need a final confrontation, a chance to exert his power and charm his way back into control. So, I had prepared. "Maria," I typed back, my fingers steady now. "Thank you for letting me know. Please don't send him up. There is a sealed envelope for him in the top drawer of your desk. Please give it to him and let him know that I am in a meeting for the rest of the afternoon." "Of course, Claire," she replied instantly. I stood up from my desk and walked to the glass wall of my office, which overlooked the main atrium and the reception area 2 floors below. I could see him. He was standing there, looking every bit the part of the powerful financial advisor. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit, his hair was immaculate, and he was holding a large bouquet of my favorite flowers, peonies. It was a classic Ethan move, a grand public gesture designed to overwhelm and disarm. He was leaning casually against the reception desk, chatting with Maria, a confident, easy smile on his face. He thought he was winning. He thought this was the final scene of a romantic comedy where the foolish girl comes to her senses. He had no idea he was the villain in a tragedy, and his downfall was moments away. I watched as Maria reached into her drawer and pulled out the crisp white envelope. She handed it to him, her expression professionally neutral. Ethan's smile faltered for a second. This wasn't part of his script. He took the envelope, a flicker of confusion on his face. He probably assumed it was a note from me, telling him to wait, or maybe a key card to my new apartment. He tore it open with a hint of impatience. I watched his eyes scan the single page inside. The letter wasn't long, and it wasn't emotional. I had drafted it with the help of a lawyer, making sure it was as cold, factual, and final as a legal document. It read, "Ethan, this is my final communication with you. My silence over the past few weeks should have made my position clear, but I am providing this letter to remove any ambiguity. Our engagement is over. Our relationship is over. I have moved out of the apartment permanently and have already arranged for the lease to be transferred solely into your name. You once told me that I would never be important, that my job was just to type reports in a small office. I am writing this letter from my new office, where I have accepted the position of Director of Operations for Innovate Dynamics. I will not allow you or anyone else to define my worth ever again. Do not attempt to contact me further. Any future attempts will be considered harassment. Claire." From my vantage point, I saw the exact moment the words registered. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly gray. His confident posture crumbled, his shoulders slumping forward. The hand holding the letter began to shake. His eyes darted around the lobby, which now seemed to be mocking him with its sleek, corporate power. He looked up, his gaze sweeping across the glass-walled offices above, searching, and then his eyes found mine. We locked gazes through 2 floors of glass and steel. His expression was one of pure, unadulterated shock. His mouth was slightly open, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. He was seeing a ghost, the ghost of the quiet, pliable woman he thought he could control forever. I didn't smile. I didn't glare. I simply held his gaze for a long moment. Then I gave him a single, small, deliberate nod. It wasn't a nod of greeting or forgiveness. It was a nod of dismissal, an acknowledgement that I saw him, and he was no longer relevant. Then I turned my back on the window, walked back to my desk, and picked up the phone to approve the next phase of the Nexus budget. I didn't look back. Later, Maria told me he had stood there for a full 5 minutes, completely frozen before stumbling out of the building, leaving the expensive bouquet of peonies wilting on her desk. The weeks after the lobby incident were the quietest of my life. With Ethan's number blocked and the final, definitive line drawn, The noise and drama that had consumed my world for so long simply ceased. The silence he left behind was not empty. It was peaceful. It was fertile ground where I could finally begin to grow. My first act of creation was finding a home. I spent a weekend looking at apartments, not with a checklist of what would impress someone else, but with a checklist of what would make me happy. I didn't need a sprawling, minimalist space with cold marble countertops. I found a small, one-bedroom apartment in a quieter neighborhood, nestled in an old brick building with large, sunny windows and worn hardwood floors. It had character. It felt warm. The moment I walked in, I knew it was mine. The process of moving in and decorating was a form of therapy. I unpacked the boxes of my old life, keeping only the things that brought me joy. I bought a deep, comfortable armchair, not a sleek designer piece, but something you could curl up in with a book for hours. I filled the shelves with my novels, my coding manuals, and photos of me and Hannah. I bought plants, a ridiculous number of them, and delighted in learning their names and their needs, finding a quiet satisfaction in watching them thrive under my care. Each nail I hammered into the wall, each piece of furniture I assembled myself, felt like a declaration. I am capable. I am building this life on my own terms. The furious, wounded texts from Ethan had stopped, but the fallout from our breakup echoed through mutual acquaintances. I heard through a former colleague that he had been completely blindsided, that he was telling everyone I had betrayed him, that I was a cold, ambitious social climber who had used him. At first, the words stung, a phantom pain from an old wound. But then I realized I didn't care. His narrative no longer had any power over me. Let him think what he wanted. I knew the truth. One evening, my mother called. Her voice was hesitant, laced with a guilt I had never heard before. She said Ethan had called them, telling them a wild story about how I had abandoned him for a new job. "Claire," she said, her voice small, We never knew he treated you that way. You always seemed so happy." "I know, Mom," I said, and for the first time, there was no bitterness in my voice. I was good at pretending. We talked for over an hour, a longer and more honest conversation than we'd had in years. I didn't share all the ugly details, but I told her enough. I told her I was happy now, truly happy. I told her about my new job, my new apartment. I told her I was finally becoming the person I was always meant to be. It was the beginning of a different kind of relationship with my parents, one based not on my utility, but on a fragile, emerging understanding. My life settled into a new, wonderful rhythm. I woke up early, not to an alarm, but to the sun streaming through my large windows. I would make coffee and sit in my comfortable armchair, reading for an hour before work. I walked to my office, enjoying the simple pleasure of moving through the city on my own 2 feet. My work at Innovate Dynamics was everything I had hoped it would be. Nexus was a huge success, and I was given the autonomy and resources to expand my team and develop new projects. I was respected, I was challenged, and I was good at my job. I made new friends, mostly colleagues from work. We'd go out for dinner after a long week, and the conversation was about ideas and projects and dreams. No one asked what my fiancé did for a living. No one judged my safe clothes. They just saw me, Claire, and they liked me for who I was. I was rediscovering myself, my sense of humor, my love for live music, my passion for solving complex problems. One Saturday afternoon, I was watering my plants, the sun warm on my back, when I thought of Ethan. I tried to summon the old feelings, the anger, the hurt, the betrayal, but they were faint, like a distant echo. They had been replaced by a quiet, profound sense of peace. I didn't hate him. I didn't wish him ill. I simply didn't think of him at all. My revenge hadn't been a loud, fiery explosion. It had been a quiet, steady act of construction. I hadn't destroyed his world. I had simply walked out of it and built my own, a world where my worth wasn't up for debate. He hadn't defined me. His cruelty had only revealed me to myself. I finished with my plants, made myself a cup of tea, and sat down with a new book. The silence in my apartment was complete. It was the sound of freedom. It was the sound of a life that was finally, peacefully mine. Sometimes the deepest betrayal comes from those closest to us, but sometimes their cruelty is the push we need to rise. If my story struck a chord with you, please like this video, subscribe, and share your own experiences in the comments. I promise, your voice matters, and your peace is worth more than their approval.